Provoj gjëra këtu. 1 2 3. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Çfarë të duhet Olsi? Çfarë të duhet?
Jo, lëre ndezur sallën.
Okej.
1 2
1 2 3
test. Test, test. 1 2 3 test. 1 2 3 test.
Po.
1 2 3 test. Ha. Kush?
Unë do ta kthesh çika të kino flon këteja, se është i errët Olsi.
Një, dy, tre, test, test, test. 1 2 3.
Yes.
1 2 1 2 1 2 3 test, test, test.
Do bëni balancë sheshin.
Lagë a e bëre balancën ulla. Ke lënë mikrofon hap?
E kam unë.
Po ule.
Kam duhet.
1 2
1 2
1 2 1 2 1 2. Çfarë duhet? Keni problem ti?
Po jo se po shtoj audio tjetër tani.
Se?
Ta kem?
Si po është tani?
Po shtoj lajnin direkt.
Ë?
Lajnin direkt.
S'po të kuptoj.
Po shtoj një audio direkt në kompjuter. E kupton?
Për backupin?
Jo, re për backup për vete këtu ta kem si audio të dytë. Një nga karta, edhe një po jap direkt në kompjuter. Një master nga mixeri direkt në kompjuter në audio në jackun e vet.
Çam lutet tash se më futet zhurmë, më ledin.
Po shky more.
Po.
Po shky më që kam në këtu, prandaj po shky. Ç'ke më lezë më dohet?
Nëse ta më unë. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 test, 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 test. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Kush? 1 2. Ha. Kim duket ishte dhe i bjesh. Po këtë rajtin e kishe të lidhur ti. Apo e ndrove tani, vure. 2 3 test 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 1 2 3 test 1 2 1 2 3 test Hı? 1 2 3 test 1 2 3 test 1 2 3 test 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 1 2 1 2 3 test 1 2 3 test 1 2 3 1 2 3 test 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 1 2 Tu do shkosh në 6. Kje parasysh. Kur të kthesh andej mos haro genin, ë. Po le të janë çash kjo valla. 1 2 3 test. Ma lër o le të janë. Ë? 1 Ma lër ngritur këtë për herë kur. 1 2 1 2 1 1 2 3 test. Tash i puno vetëm me mute-in o vlla. Okej. 1 2 1 2 hiqe nga
Mirë dita, mirë se keni ardhur në konferencën që mbahet këtu në Prishtinë. Jemi më shumë të lumtur dhe të kënaqur për bashkëpunimin tuaj. Ju faleminderit, mirë se keni ardhur. Sot është data në dhjetor, që se më fare datën. Por megjithatë, kjo ngelet gjatë ecurisë tonë, urdhri i komandës treni për Kavajt dru nuk vjen, tha, Katënaria të bëhet gati të hypi gomarëve të niset në kam. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 Më fal. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Presupozoj që nuk do i përplasin duart fort këtu. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Nëse kemi ndonjë nga punëtorët e hotelit do na bënte punë tani këtë moment. Na duhet një punëtor këtu hoteli, se është kjo pjesa këtu që shkëlqen edhe duhet fshirë pak. Ndonjë punëtor këtu të hotelit, punëtor shërbimi? 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 Prova, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Varet sa do e ketë tonin e zërit, nuk është të thonë ai që do flasë këtu. Zakonisht këta anglezët nuk kanë komplekse në të folur, ne kemi që komplekse. Këta bërtasin dhe ulërasin. Por gjithsesi ngelet duke u parë dhe ecuria dhe vazhdimësia gjithmonë. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2... Po. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Më duke se salla nuk dëgjon gjë. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dë vazhdoj të flas apo? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do të rash bokset për sallën. 1, 2, 3, 4. Duhet me rujt edhe gainin që mos na digjet nga tekniku i zërit për në transmitim. Përveç se duhet me mbulu dhe sallën me dëgjim. 1, 2, 3, 4. Jeni shumë mirë. Faleminderit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sot është ditë relativisht e butë, temperaturat janë normale.
Mos kërcit duar aty.
Po sikur ai që do flasin ta bëj këtë punë.
Që një sfungjer. Ke një sfungjer aty?
Sfungjer, na duhet një sfungjer ose një diçka, një jastik apo rrobe apo sigur interferon pak, ë? Interferon pak. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kjo ka mundësi ta shtyp pak më mbrapa mikrofonin? Që të vendosi robi edhe letrat që do lexoj? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 prova. 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 Ledion, qa ka naj gjë që nuk shkon? Mirë është. 1, 2, 3, 4. Unë të vazhdoj. 1, 2, 3, 4. Po më duket vetja si ashtu. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ndjes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ju falenderit për mirë kuptimin. Mirë se keni ardhur. Interferon pak ambienti sallën. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Qa është ajo? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta ngrejnë të? Më ndryshe. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. Jemi para jush këtu. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Ju faleminderit gjithëve për pranin tuaj. Jam shumë i lumtur këtu. Nuk dua të kthehem mrapsh. Treshi, mikrofoni i bart. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. Mikrofoni i bart. Bardhe, Ilva. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. Test. 1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. Një, dy. Është okay. Po e fik.
Important part. Yeah, we have that there. But if you think like it, because of the contour, it would be better if yes, that's what you have. I mean, for us, it's not too important. I think. Okay, perfect. So about the exchange. Yeah. How we are going to do it? So,
I kuqi, dyshi. 1, 2, 3 test.
Prime Minister's remarks.
1, 2, 3 test. I kuqi.
Immediately once he finishes,
Një, dy,
Defner
një,
will
dy.
just come up.
Okay.
Give
1,
the gift,
2, 3 test.
and it's
1, 2, 3 test. Po e fik.
Think about that. Can we make him sit after he finishes and definitely come up and remind him again? Okay, yeah.
1, 2, 3 test. S'do kesh qerosa në panel, kështu që ky është treshi i kuqi. Bluji, më fal. Blyti. 1, 2, 3 test. Okej. 1, 2, 3, test, 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 test. 1, 2, 1, 2, check. Okej. Djemë dhe ndrojmë të baterinë e kësaj më. Ha? Lata mos harro rekordin, e? Në peqer. Një, dy, test. Test. Një, dy, test. E djona për I letë të ndezur unë akullorët e. Një, dy, tre, test. Dyshi, kuqi. Treshi, bardhi. Okej? Si? Çatal? Kaç büyüler? Afrodit, Afrodit. Дело. Окей. Sí? 1, 2, 3, test, test. Jo, e kam bërë mute, nuk e kam bërë. Ke gjë? Ta. Një, dy, një, dy. Okay, një, dy. Një, dy, një, dy, një, dy, një, dy, një, dy. Një kuqi. Okay. Blu. Okay.
distinguished guests, Mir Serdat. I also have Albanian roots from my ancestors, so trying to learn Albanian, and I'm very happy to be here today. For the launch of Atlantic Council's report, Getting Back on Track, Unlocking Kosovo's Euro-Atlantic and Development Perspective. So it is a pleasure to be here in Pristina in this lovely, beautiful day. Our report explores the path forward for Kosovo's inclusion in transatlantic institutions such as European Union and NATO, and the geopolitical and economic challenges and opportunities facing the country. Since Kosovo achieved its independence, until today, the geopolitical environment and context of the region has changed significantly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine now almost 2 years ago has also had important implications for the future of Balkans. Under this changing environment, Kosovo has made significant progress on its road to join the transatlantic institutions such as NATO and the European Union. We at the Atlantic Council strongly feel that now this is an ideal time to take stock of the progress Kosovo has made and discuss the roadmap for the future. This project was undertaken by my Center Atlantic Council in Turkey and Turkey programs, as well as Atlantic Council's Europe Center. We are, as I said, we are honored to have with us today Prime Minister Kurti, in addition to our distinguished guests, several ambassadors from Pristina. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you again for joining us, and I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. Faleminderit. In a few moments, I will pass the floor to Ms. Ebru Özdemir, our International Advisory Board member of the Atlantic Council, and also chairperson of Limak Holding, for her remarks. Ebru's vision and support for this report and today's event were instrumental in its realization. So thank you, Ebru Özdemir. After our remarks and speeches, we will have a panel discussion moderated by Ilva Tare, our non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, with the author of our report, Agon Malici, an independent journalist. With this occasion, I also would like to thank to our author, Agon, for his timely work. Our second panelist is Alban Hashani, Executive Director of Kosovo-based think tank Reinvest. With this occasion, I also would like to thank our Europe Center team back in Washington, D.C., and his Senior Director, Jorn Fleck, for his great collaboration. I hope today's discussion and the report itself contribute to Kosovo's accession path, as well as the region's stability. Without further ado, I'm pleased to invite Ebru Özdemir to the stage for her remarks. Ebru, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm not Albanian, but I feel like Albanian. It's been more than 10 years now that Kosovo is like our home. His Excellency Prime Minister Kurti, distinguished guests, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all, and a warm welcome to you. And thank you for being here today with us at the launch of this crucial report, as Defne Hanım said, Getting Back on Track, Unlocking Kosovo's Euro-Atlantic and Development Perspective. And as a member of Atlantic Council's International Advisory Board, I'm honored to join this panel and contribute to this discussion. And I'd like to begin by extending my gratitude to Prime Minister Kurti for being with us today, because his unwavering support and commitment to Kosovo's progress has been very instrumental in shaping the nation's path forward. I have been following him in all the international meetings as well, like Davos, and it's always been very successful. So I think it's very vital at this time. And I must also extend my gratitude to Mrs. Defne Aslan, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council in Turkey program, and the representative of Atlantic Council in Turkey and her team, Grady and Alp. They worked a lot for this event. And it takes a collective effort to drive the positive change. For so many years now, Limak and Atlantic Council in Turkey, thanks to Defne Hanım, has been working so efficiently. Also, LIMAC team, I'd like to thank them as well, because we have completed many projects, including a documentary, the first documentary in Atlantic Council's history. And now I'm very excited about this report, because it's a cooperation between our teams, and not last but not the least, I'd like to also thank the Atlantic Council's Europe Center and its leadership. The center has been the driver of the report. And we are all aware of the Atlantic Council's influence in the region is a testament to the power of collaboration. And for this report, they collaborated with Mr. Agon Maliki. And using this chance, I also would like to thank to him for his contribution. And of course, Dr. Alban Hashani, the Executive Director of Reinvest Institute, and Mr. Ilvatare, non-resident senior fellow of the European Center of Atlantic Council, for joining the panel today. Ladies and gentlemen, as LIMAC, our connection to Balkans runs deeper, and Kosovo holds a very special place in our hearts. And this is reflected in our commitment to the nation's prosperity. And beyond the Pristina International Airport, where we have started 11 years ago, and KEDS Energy, we invest in the aspirations of the people, especially the young people, who are driving the force of the positive change. And our participations in Kosovo's journey towards prosperity is evident in our presence here today, and a clear expression of confidence in the country's economic potential. And beyond being only observers, we are committed to contributing to Kosovo economically and socially from the outset. And we are also excited about the prospects of engaging more and more, and also to play a role in shaping country's economic future. And as earlier said, in Kosovo, our engagement goes beyond our business investments. For 10 years, we have successfully completed 2 projects, which was the KEDS Academy and Airports Institute. And now, through our Global Engineer Girls project, GEG's Kosovo chapter, we aim to contribute to the region's sustainable development, creating opportunities for innovation, job creation, and lasting positive impact. And this year, on October, we were again here in Pristina for the first graduation ceremony of Global Engineer Girls, where we celebrated the first 20 young women's graduation. And hopefully the number will increase and we'll reach more young women in Kosovo who works in STEM, who wants to be engineers, and who will have successful careers. Distinguished guests, now coming to the report that we are launching here today, many good opportunities as well. As we navigate these challenges and opportunities ahead, let us remember that our journey is crossed with the vibrant spirit of Balkans and our belief in the enduring potential of its people. In closing, let's view this report not just as a document, but as a roadmap, guiding Kosovo towards a future marked by stability, prosperity, and sustainable development. Together, we can transform aspirations into reality and build a future that echoes with the potential of Kosovo. I once again would like to thank His Excellency Prime Minister Kurti for his participation today, to all panelists who we will be listening today, and of course the Atlantic Council Europe Center and in Turkey program for their support. Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite His Excellency Prime Minister Kurti for his speech, if he may. I want to, one more thing. Thank you very much.
Dear Deputy Prime Minister Emilia Recepi, dear Ms. Arslan, Senior Director, Atlantic Council in Turkey, dear Ms. Özdemir, dear Mr. Volkan Bozkir, an old friend with whom we've met first over 10 years ago, honorable ambassadors, dear members of parliament, colleagues from the government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to address you today. The Atlantic Council is a friendly organization of the Republic of Kosovo and a well-known platform to speak openly with each other about the political and economic challenges we face as an Atlantic community in a changing world. Congratulations also on the report, although I don't fully share some of the assumptions made. Not to dwell on history, but I think those who know this region know well that Kosovo's freedom and independence are not a gift. It was won after centuries of occupation and different empires and regimes. It was won with the sacrifice and the blood of our people through generations. Most recently, besides our people's liberation struggle, led by the United States, it was won also with the intervention of the most powerful alliance in human history, NATO. Just as it is imperative to recall the event, it is also imperative to understand the reason behind such an intervention, which was to stop the genocidal campaign of a dictator. Although the most recent, this wasn't the first time that the United States led a coalition against dictatorship in Europe. In the Second World War, the United States helped liberate France and the rest of Europe from the Nazi regime. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, not unilaterally, but in concert and coordination with the international community. After the genocidal campaign that led to NATO intervention, after years of UN administration, after years of negotiations in Vienna, led by the UN Special Envoy Marti Ahtisaari, who later won a Nobel Peace Prize, and concluded in the report sent to the Security Council for approval that the only viable option for Kosovo is independence, supervised independence, which lasted for 4 years. So it is very interesting to recall now that almost 25 years ago, in spring 1999, 19 countries got together to bomb a European country. It must have been very bad. As we know today, 19 countries sometimes cannot issue a press release together. But back then, they bombed Milosevic's Yugoslavia. On 15th of January, we are going to commemorate 25 years of a horrible Rečak massacre, which was a clear indication that in Kosovo we have Srebrenica on the making. On the other hand, in September 2012, 25 countries together, comprising international steering group, jointly concluded that supervision of Kosovo's independence should be terminated. We have 19 countries together, all Western democratic, saying that Milosevic's Yugoslavia should be bombed, and we have 25 countries together in September 2012 saying that Kosovo is fine, it should be fully independent, and supervision shall be terminated. To use Kosovo as a precedent to justify intervention elsewhere, like Kremlin is doing, is nothing but a direct attack on truth, humanity, and sanity. It also shows a complete disregard for international law and the responsibility to protect, as an international norm seeking to ensure that the international community never again fails to hold the mass atrocity crimes of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. This was a concept that emerged and was enforced after NATO intervention in Kosovo and was adopted unanimously in 2005 at the UN World Summit, the largest gathering of heads of states and government in history. It also shows disregard for the International Court of Justice, which by 10 votes to 4 gave the opinion that the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo, adopted on 17th of February 2008, did not violate international law. Our planet does not have a higher court than ICJ. Therefore, the legal debate on declaration of independence of Kosovo has been concluded on 22nd of July 2010. I believe that now, when far-right movements and autocrats are on the rise, the Atlantic community and democracies must be even more active. This, first and foremost, would relate to joining of the 5 EU non-recognizers to the rest 22 members of European Union who do recognize independence of Kosovo by pushing dictators and extremists who air false narratives and draw false comparisons to justify their hegemonic projects. So it is not only we who would be helped, it is the transatlantic bridge and the democracies in the world today who would make a leap forward in combating this right-wing extremism and autocratic tide which is taking place in democratic West, coming out victorious sooner rather than later. Undoubtedly, Kosovo is a success story of NATO intervention on one hand and of democratic state building and socioeconomic development on the other hand. Independent evaluators show that Kosovo is a champion of democracy in the region, with the fastest democratic rise in the last 3 years in rule of law, political rights and civil liberties, liberal and electoral democracy, transparency and anti-corruption. It also has the highest economic growth on average compared with the region. So task number 1 is to get the 5 EU non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo. And this is and must be a shared task among the transatlantic community because it is a shared responsibility. Of course, normalization of relations with Serbia matters. It matters because Serbia is our neighbor with whom we share over half of our border, and we cannot change geography and history. It also matters because Serbia has initiated all wars in former Yugoslavia, where it neither took responsibility nor apologized for all the human suffering, crime, and destruction they caused. On the contrary. Today, it keeps 48 military forward operating bases, like a horseshoe around Kosovo. And this horseshoe in 1999 was inside Kosovo, now is around it. In the first 2 years of our government, Serbia brought its military 4 times to the border, flying Russian MiG-29 planes, fighter jets, Russian Mi-35 choppers, and it brought Russian T-72 MS tanks. Serbia, unfortunately, has not changed, nor has it democratized. Instead of showing remorse for the crimes it committed in the past, it keeps threatening new wars. This is why normalization matters. Normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia needs normalization of Serbia in a democratic and European sense of the word. And all this not only because Kosovo's membership in international organizations must not be objected to, but because Kosovo and Serbia must be able to live side by side as normal neighbors with good neighborly European relations. This is why I welcomed President Biden's letter in 2021 that put mutual recognition at the center of a future normalization agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. Because mutual recognition is mutual acceptance of reality, which must also include dealing with the past to enable reconciliation. Faced with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Atlantic community urged to settle for less. Instead of a final agreement centered on mutual recognition, it pushed rather for an agreement on the path towards normalization centered on mutual de facto recognition. Of course, our government is for dialogue, and in any circumstance, we only engage in agreements that further advance Kosovo's interest and strengthen our statehood, and that do not lessen or undermine it. Yet, a question is legitimate. Why ever settle for less? Why appease Vučić? If there is any lesson to draw from the war in Ukraine, it is that appeasing autocrats never works. They take generosity shown to them as a sign of weakness, fear, or both. They, unfortunately, only understand resilience and democratic force. But instead of sticks, the president of Serbia has been approached with carrots. The more trouble he makes in the region, the more money he asks and takes from the EU. The more he moves towards Russia and China, the more the European Union chases him with funds. Meanwhile, ever since he came to power, Serbia has only backslid into autocracy. Despite all this, Kosovo has remained committed, constructive, and creative in the dialogue. We now have an agreement which must be protected by those who brought it. It cannot be the case where a legally binding agreement is violated without consequences. Yet Serbia has violated on numerous occasions without any consequence. We But delivery. This gap is in part due to the unresolved problems that have piled up in the last 2 decades, but also be they, for example, lack of investment in, say, the energy sector, healthcare, education, and training for new jobs, but also at the same time there are structural problems that take time to address because the change does not have the form of a new event, but of new structures in place for new processes. For example, the lack of investment in the energy sector, despite growing demand, has brought us to a situation where we cannot meet our energy requirements. There are 2 power stations built, one in the 60s, the other in the 80s, which require constant repair and cause too much pollution. We have acted. In our first 2 years, we responded with a strategy that will increase production capacities for renewables by an additional 1.2 gigawatts by 2031, and with nearly 1 billion in new investments in projects for making the energy transition a reality for Kosovo. Solar park, 100 megawatts. The auction is open until 31st of January. We are offering 15 years of power purchase agreement and 30 years of land lease agreement. And mid-next year, we will open the other auction for generation of electrical energy by windmills, 150 megawatts. In contrast to this one solar park, 100 megawatt, will be non-specific site. Whereas solar park, 365 hectares, out of which 120 have to be chosen, is in the village of Kramovic in Rahovec. We need a just transition, one where funds are not diverted to stop or delay our economic growth, and one that does not increase our dependence on energy sources we don't have. Our country is young, but our education system has not prepared our people for current and upcoming jobs. The education system and the position of the teacher was seen in the past decade as a place to advance and reward party activists in exchange for votes. The same was applied in the healthcare system. This, together with chronic avoidance of addressing problems that were piling up in the economy, education, and healthcare system, has seen hundreds of thousands of young people leave the country, a process that culminated in the winter of 2014 with massive migration and continues to a less extent ever since. This is a problem that threatens to impede our social and economic progress. It is the result of failed policies of the past, which we have been dealing with since day one. Our response to education has been the introduction of the dual education system, what the Germans call Ausbildung, and we've learned this word from our diaspora in Germany and Switzerland, where we're investing in vocational training programs, trying to bridge the skills gap between professional education and labor market. It must be the case that those who get a degree from the university should be able to find a job. That is why we are addressing the huge gap between what a university degree offers and what the job market requires. To refer to what Ms. Ozdemir was saying, we have allocated around 3,000 scholarships for female students in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And now in Kosovo, believe it or not, 50% of students in STEM are women. Average EU is 17%. So we have seen that investing in female students is the highest return case that one can get. Only with scholarships of 1,000 euro per year, which are not much, so much can be accomplished. I believe that our policies will be able to not only stop the migration of our young people, but also reverse it, as there are numerous companies now who are bridging Kosovo's potential with Kosovo's talented youth inside the country and abroad. But as the latest results in PISA revealed, this is a long process. Addressing this requires teachers to be held to professional standards and understand that being a teacher is a noble profession. It is the government's job to ensure a decent salary and working conditions, but it is the teacher's job to inspire and teach our children so that they can excel. There is more work, way more work to be done to address mounting issues, but I believe, therefore insist, that we are on the right track. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister Kurti, thank you very much for your remarks and your insights on the government achievements. It is really remarkable, especially as an economist myself. You know, the inflation rate drop is really significant from the beginning of the year, so congratulations. And without, before we pass to our panel, if I may invite you again to the podium, from Atlantic Council, we have a small gift to, you know, as a memoir for the day, and if I can invite you back again, and maybe Ebru Hanım as well, so we can, okay, so we are out of the box, okay, fine. So we are giving this like this boxes over there, but this is, because it is very difficult to take it out of the box. We have just Turkish delight inside, so yeah, so maybe if we can take pictures, you know, just, yeah. Shall we just, yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much for this. I know how you call them, but we call them local.
Saying, you know, you eat sweet, you speak sweet. But your speech was very remarkable.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you very much.
What I can bet now is that my second coffee today will be way better than the first.
Yes, thank you very much. This is special one.
Thank you. Before we take your seat, if we can invite, you know, just also Deputy Prime Minister and Mr. Özdemir and Ebru Özdemir and, you know, Ambassador Bozkır and our team for the family photo, and then we will quickly go on to our, you know, just panel.
We will start in a few minutes. Mirë se u gjej, kënaqësi të jem këtu. Welcome everyone to this timely discussion on the future of Kosovo and its place in the Western Balkans. Today, as already we talked about it, we will discuss Kosovo's trajectory, analyzing the current state of play, domestically and internationally. This report explores the key opportunities, but also vulnerabilities that will determine the future of Kosovo. Similar to an adolescent entering young adulthood, Kosovo now is 15 years old and has encountered many challenges in this 15 years old existence, but also has benefited from the unwavering support of Western partners, including major global powers. However, the path towards Euro-Atlantic integration and broader development objectives have been fraught with obstacles. As we have witnessed, Daphne and the Prime Minister Kurti mentioned, the global security environment has undergone a dramatic shift since 2008. Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the rise of China have undoubtedly impacted Kosovo's effort to achieve its strategic goals. How have this shift affected Kosovo and its future trajectory? It's indeed a question that we will discuss with our guests. And it goes without saying that I'm delighted to moderate this conversation of this report. This is an initiative presented by the Atlantic Councils in Turkey and the Europe Center as part of our Balkans Forward initiative. Join me in welcoming Agon Malici, political analyst and media writer, the author of this paper. Congratulations. Even though the Prime Minister didn't agree all the assumptions made there, I'll ask you in a bit about it. And please welcome Dr. Alban Hashani, Executive Director of the Reinvest Institute. I trust we were going to have a very interesting conversation. I'll start immediately with you, Agon. Can you walk us through the main objectives, the main goals of this report, and the main conclusions for those who haven't read the report yet?
Thank you, Idva. When we started writing this, and it's been a long process of writing because we started a long time ago. It was, we started with the idea of looking at a big picture in terms of both time and space. When we're discussing about Kosovo, we get too bogged down into the immediate crisis, and we've had a lot of those over the last year. We thought it was important to look back and look at the trajectory for several reasons, for international audiences, but also domestic ones. For international ones, it's because it's often forgotten that, especially in the context of after Afghanistan, Iraq, to highlight Kosovo as still one success story for the West, of Western state building and liberal interventionism. I think the West needs to be regularly reminded of that, of one of its successes. But also to highlight how this success is still vulnerable. So it raises the question, has Kosovo been successful? Yes, but. It's the famous meme, yes, but. So the report tries to look at this macro picture in time and space and identify what the vulnerabilities are and what vulnerabilities are emerging. For the past, it's unfinished business in a way, and how much that has consumed domestic politics in Kosovo for the past decade or more. The dialogue with Serbia and the lack of a Euro-Atlantic perspective has kind of overwhelmed everything. All the discussions about all the other important topics. So we thought it would be good to analyze what's happening now, and we're in a very difficult situation right now. There is a need to look at it from a broader perspective in history, but also looking forward to highlight what could be some of the risks in the geopolitical environment if the dispute with Serbia is not resolved.
I have many questions on that, especially considering the new elections in America, a potential new administration. But before we go there, can you guess which were the assumptions that you made in the report that Prime Minister Kurti didn't share?
I think there will be a few, but I think we're in a democracy, so I guess it's okay to disagree. And in a lot of these issues, I disagree a lot. I think it could be the assumption that that the dialogue with Serbia is the only instrument or the only way forward. I think the Prime Minister kind of suggested it in this speech, but also in previous remarks that, the dialogue is just one thing. The argument that this paper makes is that, the dialogue is an instrument that has been given to Kosovo by its allies and supporters to resolve some of these issues. We cannot change, for example, Spain's position, Slovakia's position, no matter what the moral or legal argument we have. In a way, they have kind of limited Kosovo's space. Yeah. So I think that's one of the assumptions, that I think where there is a disagreement within Kosovo, there is no consensus, and this lack of consensus has been very, very problematic and has been a source of tremendous political turmoil over the past decade. It's consumed so much energy at a time when we need to talk about development and economy, and I guess Alban will be reflecting on that and in giving young people a better perspective.
And on this window of opportunity that we in DC, actually we have heard a lot by the current administration, that was being closed day by day. Do you think Kosovo missed out on that opportunity during the last year?
I think the window has been closing. I'm skeptical that within the next year something will happen, especially after what happened this year. The report tries to highlight what was positive in the Western approach to resolving the dialogue, but I think the opportunity stood in several facts. One is, maybe 2 years ago, Russia was weaker. It was much weaker as a factor in the Balkans, so that created the space for the West, and the West had more leverage in the region. These were all positive opportunities for Kosovo. Despite the fact that we have heavy polarization, we have an opposition that I think has been constructive on the issue of the dialogue, or would have been constructive, so there would have been an ability to create domestic consensus. And I think we had a leadership that enjoys public trust. The Prime Minister and the President enjoy a lot of public trust. So I think a lot of the elements were there to see this as an opportunity, and there was a lot of transatlantic unity, which we didn't have 3 or 4 years ago. But now we're in a moment where that window is closing and these unpredictable factors are coming in. The time to implement something is narrowing because we have elections in the US, elections in Europe, all over Europe, and high unpredictability about what's happening within Serbia and Kosovo. So I think right now I'm tilted more towards the risk side rather than the opportunities.
The Prime Minister mentioned that number one for his government is the EU 5 non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo. Do you see that happening?
I think that is the key. I think that would have been the key thing for Kosovo to move ahead. I'm not sure it is happening. It's not something that can happen within the dialogue with Serbia because you cannot have these 5 countries in the process. What they have made clear is that they will wait for an agreement between Kosovo and Serbia to shift their position. What I think should happen, and I hope the government is prioritizing this, is a separate bilateral process between these countries and Kosovo's key supporters, US, Germany, UK, to have them look at the strategic implications of the current moment and to make a leap forward. But I don't think that leap forward will be made outside of the dialogue and within the current kind of high degree of animosity we have between Kosovo and Serbia.
And also one more point on from the Prime Minister's speech. He asked for enforcement by the West of the basic treaty signed, agreed in Brussels, and he insisted on the signature, which apparently is not a problem. It's considered a legally binding agreement by the US and the EU. Will this be an obstacle in implementing the obligations? I didn't hear, for instance, ASM from Prime Minister Kurti, which is the main number one condition. I
think that's a key issue, is this issue of the ability of the West to dictate and impose the agreement. Yes, I think he has a valid point in this. Kosovo has right to be skeptical. Whether it's an issue of the signature or something else, even more problematic is the fact that the EU is saying that for them this is a legally binding document, but some countries within the EU are now kind of refusing, for example, to put it in the minutes of the EU Council that, you know, this is a condition for Serbia in its EU accession path. So even within the EU, so that's why I'm saying the window is closing, because the transatlantic unity or unity within the EU that existed maybe a year and a half ago because of Russia is fading. Internal divisions within the EU are emerging, and this is damaging Kosovo because it is making the EU less powerful to dictate the terms of the agreement.
And for our audience that is following online and probably don't know much about the situation, what's your read? How does this lack of full recognition from the EU, 5 non-recognizers, and other international institutions affect Kosovo?
It's this deep, lingering insecurity over the long-term security. So effectively no path towards NATO membership, no path towards EU membership. That's kind of the medium and long term. In the short term, it's the kind of security risk we're seeing. So if maybe the Balkans survived the wave of Ukraine war in terms of, you know, we were more resilient, there was no export of the conflict here, although there were attempts to do that. Because of NATO's presence here, you know, this NATO's presence here is not enough. The biggest guarantee is Kosovo's membership in NATO. But I think the second key way in which it impacts, and maybe Alban will talk more about this, is the economic perspective. Because if you have this high degree of insecurity about the prospects of the future, this will reflect on how people behave, how they perceive the country, the future, you know, whether they leave the country, how investors behave. So I think this aspect is often neglected in our discussions.
And thank you, Agon. I'll actually ask Alban now about the economic aspect and the perspective. Although it seems that Kosovo is doing great from what we heard from Prime Minister Kurti. Do you agree with his reading of the situation?
Sometimes numbers can sort of conceal more than reveal, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, we're in the steady path, a natural path of economic growth that we've been having for the last decade and a half, which in effect is not transformative. And so we're back on where we were. Only after the pandemic we had a double-digit growth, but we went back to 3-4% growth rates, which are not transformative. And based on the sort of forecasts of major international organizations that looked at different country groups, this is what we will be facing ahead in the coming years.
Agon talked a little bit about this geopolitical and security perspective, but perhaps equally or even more, I believe, is important. The economy is important in this aspect. There are some school of thought that believe that geoeconomics now is becoming new geopolitics. How much have the political constraints impacted Kosovo's economic development?
Well, the lack of full international recognition, and in particular this ongoing dispute with Serbia, had its toll on economic development. And first and foremost, it's about the signals it sends abroad. This has impacted the investors. So we've had a lack of much-needed foreign investment, which would potentially address some of the imbalances that we have in Kosovo, who typically would opt out of countries that tend to send this kind of signals. So this is the major element there. The second is related to trade. So the ongoing dispute with Serbia also creates problems in trade and limits our competitiveness, but also lowers our competitiveness. The waiting in the border, all different types of non-tariff barriers that are imposed essentially create problems for our exporters. Just to give you a sort of in relative terms, a World Bank estimates that 3-hour wait at the border is similar to 2% increase in tariffs, which lowers our competitiveness, so to say. But I think the most important element is the internal governance issues that it creates, because even unwillingly, this is overshadowing the whole discussion about economic aspects of it. So a lot of energy has been spent on discussing the geopolitical situation, and in particular relations with Serbia, and overshadowed all public policies when it comes to important aspects like education, health sector, and so on, And unfortunately, they don't also get sufficient public scrutiny because of this overwhelming topic that we have.
The report mentions Kosovo's current limbo status. In what ways do you believe this limbo status has hindered Kosovo's development?
Well, I think that this, for the reason that I mentioned, essentially there is a lot of focus on this dialogue and relations with Serbia, and little focus on public policy that will help Kosovo's economy to overpass some of the imbalances it has. Kosovo faces significant trade imbalance, so it is a mostly based, its growth sources are external, so to say. And it is heavily dependent on remittances, which also are a source of foreign investors. And by design, they are focused on sectors that are in nature non-tradable. So most of investors coming from diaspora are focused on real estate, also tourism, which by design are not tradable, not adding to the export sector of Kosovo. But provided that this continues, this will create problems not only for Kosovo, but I think for the whole region, because as it stands, the regional cooperation is insufficient to close the gap with Western economies. And what we've seen is that if you observe the data of interregional trade, you see that CEFTA is losing grounds in terms of being it as a partner of regional countries. Some regional countries are more sort of trading with Western countries rather than internally, and the same is observed within investment patterns. So if you look at the investments among Western Balkan countries, they are both in relative and absolute terms insignificant, apart from some investments which follow a specific pattern, like investments from Albania to Kosovo and vice versa, and investments of Serbia and Republika Srpska. So there is not a lot of, so to say, horizontal linkages in the region to create preconditions for a acceleration of growth, which would eventually narrow the gap in convergence.
I agree, this fragmentarization between the countries in the region hasn't helped the regional cooperation. What is your evaluation of Kosovo's role in promoting, in strengthening regional cooperation?
Well, I think looking at all different metrics, Kosovo is a fair player in regional context. If you look at CEFTA, disproportionately Kosovan businesses are faced with non-tariff barriers compared to other countries. But Kosovo in itself is sort of small enough to sort of make a difference here. And just to give an example, so I think also among other regional countries, the regional cooperation is insufficient to create this new momentum. In 1995, for instance, both North Macedonia and Lithuania stood at 30% of GDP per capita compared to EU average. Fast forward to 2015, Lithuania is at 67%, Macedonia remained at 35%. Yeah. So it is a problem that this cannot essentially create more, it has reached its limit to narrow the gap in convergence. And I think this has to be coupled with a more accelerated EU integration process.
This leads me to another issue that it can turn into a problem. In a few days, from January 1st, Kosovo will finally benefit from long-awaited and deserved visa liberalization. Will visa-free travel increase immigration, in your view? Can it be controlled? Can Kosovo government do something to address, in a way, auto-migration? Yeah.
Well, you rightly pointed out there was a long due process, and unfortunately a technical process turned into a sort of enforcing conditionality, so to say. The trend of immigration from the region has been observed especially since 2016. After the Berlin process, Germany in particular has made it very easy for people from the region to go to Germany. And in that sense, if you look at the data only for Germany, since 2016, 120,000 people left Kosovo, which for Germany alone, and these are people with working permit visas, which is around 1% of population annually. So we've lost around 6% over the last 6 years. which is sort of a similar trend appears across the region, but it's higher in Kosovo. And then if you translate this into the percentage of working age population, this is about 1.5% almost, which tells a lot about the pressure in the supply side of labor in the years to come. So we don't see a significant change, but even if this continues, is problematic enough in terms of how do you deal with the shortages in the labor market. And what we've observed in our research is that businesses are trying to improve some of the working conditions, which produces valuable policy recommendations for the government in terms of what in the short term they can do. But there are other structural problems why people are leaving, not necessarily job related. And these require a long time.
What are the other reasons?
Well,
what are the factors when the young professionals have to decide either to leave or stay in Kosovo?
What we observed is that a lot of people are leaving for better quality of life, and not just for themselves, but also for their kids. Because what we've seen is that even though we have a drop in birth rates at around 1,000 a year, we have around 7,000 less first graders starting the first school for the first time. So essentially people are being born but are leaving, which has shifted or changed the profile of a typical migrant from Kosovo, which 10, 15 years ago was typically a male between 25, 35, unemployed. And now you see people, whole families leaving. So this creates all sorts of problems. And most of them cite quality of education and health services for them and their kids.
Is there any realistic timeline of when this Western standard quality of life in Kosovo can be achieved? Years, decades? I know I'm asking too much, but if you can make a prediction.
With this pace, and knowing the life expectancy in Kosovo, that won't be in my lifetime. That's a sort of very gloomy picture. But I think with this, all predictions suggest that it would take the region around 5 decades to converge with EU average.
If things go well.
If things go as now.
That's a positive scenario.
No, this is not a positive scenario, as it is. In essence, I think that there should be some sort of a two-track approach. One, which is this greater regional cooperation, but coupled with a proper promise that there will be an integration. Because what we have been observed also in other former socialist countries, like Visegrad countries, for instance, where CEFTA free trade agreement was initiated, they didn't reap the effects of the free trade agreement at the beginning. Only after it was clear that EU integration is a real option, they started to cooperate among themselves. And this is something that we're observing here as well. So in absence of this sort of clear path towards EU integration, the convergence, I'm afraid, is a longer-term process.
Unless there are clear steps from the EU to show that the enlargement is happening.
Yes, I think some of the steps, especially now with the new growth plan, try to give some signals to that effect. But whether these are sufficient.
If
I'm
they are
afraid
enough
they're
or
not.
not.
No.
Thank you, Alban, for this part. We will turn again to the regional market. Agon, looks like without the big decisions, the dialogue and results, no economy or other decisions can be happening or impact on the life of Kosovo people. In your view, does the current EU-facilitated dialogue offers the best path forward for the negotiations?
It could have. It had the potential, but I think the framework still remains weak and very vulnerable. Alban just mentioned now, how much, and the paper looks at it historically, how much 2014 and 15, the downward spiral started with the region getting a signal that there is no actually enlargement perspective. It changed all the incentives and behaviors of regional leaders, of how companies behaved, and that impacted the dialogue because the promise of EU accession was the kind of the framework within which the West had leverage over Serbia and dictated in a way Serbia's behavior. So now the EU does not have what to offer to the sides as incentives, because nobody believes the EU's credibility for accession, especially, for example, after what happened to North Macedonia, where they went and had a historic agreement on the name change and nothing moved forward. But also because how can the EU promise EU membership to Serbia, because Kosovo is not the only condition. Serbia has a lot of other problems as a country. So the EU cannot, in the current framework, does not have the power or the willingness, and now also, again, going back to the lack of unity, to act together forcefully, to dictate that whatever is signed is implemented. So in that context, the sides do not only trust each other, they don't trust the mediator. And when you don't trust the mediator, that makes it very, very difficult.
Are there any other alternatives apart from the EU dialogue?
No, that's the unfortunate thing, and that's why I think the parties need to find ways to make it work. I don't know what that is. At least from Kosovo's perspective, I would go back to what the head of our parliament said a couple of months ago, Mr. Glauko Njuvca, who is from the Prime Minister's party, who, when he justified why Kosovo agreed to the French-German proposal or the plan, he said, it looked to us that it's a good deal to implement an ASM, or Association of Serbian Majority Municipalities, that is, within the constitutional framework, but also, get this in exchange for de facto recognition. The thing now is that I don't think our party believes that de facto recognition will happen. And that's why now there is sort of this, and I think this is where the government has consensus also within the opposition, is that it is difficult for Kosovo to accept just the ASM and not get unlocked internationally. I think that is a recipe for disaster, so there's a strong case to be made that of why there is skepticism in Kosovo. But I do think that more effort could be made to work with allies, with the US especially, with UK, Turkey, Germany, everyone, and Kosovo has a lot of friends, to make sure that that happens. And I don't think that there's been a lot of effort, enough effort, at least from our government side, to build that trust with these key allies.
And indeed, we're having this conversation from Pristina, so from Kosovo's point of view. What are the main obstacles that are preventing Kosovo from achieving a comprehensive settlement with Serbia? Is it lack of will? Is it technicalities? Is it lack of support from the West? What do you see as the main factors? I
kind of highlighted some of them. So I think it's lack of trust, first of all, that the benefits will come. And especially in a context where this is a very politically sensitive issue. The Prime Minister, who spoke here, ran as an opposition leader, staunchly objecting, for example, the issue of the ASM. He has made rhetorical shifts on that, which I think are welcomed, but they have to see what Kosovo gets out of it. So I think it's a very difficult compromise for Kosovo to make. I think that is, the inability to see that what is promised to Kosovo will come. And now, maybe if we were a year back earlier, maybe there would have still been some time to work with allies to get to that point. Now we face a context in which we have agreements which might have to be implemented in a context where we might see shifts in the West. So I think now there is the fear, and I would assume that in Serbia actually the assumption and desire to push the status quo for as long as possible, hoping that the tides will change in the US or in Europe. So I think now there's this mistrust that whatever has been agreed, if it starts to be implemented, Kosovo will be stuck with an ASM, but not get an open path to NATO membership and an EU path.
Again, we discussed mostly what Kosovo should do on this, but how about the West? Should they change tactics, strategy? Can they take a more aggressive stance, like an arbiter and enforcer in the dialogue, even though if it means losing neutrality and changing approach to Serbia?
Absolutely. I think, and I make the case in the paper, that the West has started to move from a mere facilitator into more of an enforcer. So rewarding sides who behave within the frameworks of the proposal and trying to punish sides that are misbehaving. But I think there's asymmetry there. Like take, for example, what happened in the north, and the sort of the measures that were taken against Kosovo, and the ones the lack of any substantive measures taken against Serbia. This is now a problem, especially at the EU level, because there is lack of unity on how to address, take these punitive measures. And the EU has the strongest, for example, economic tools to pressure the sides, and there is a clear asymmetry favoring Serbia. What traditionally happened is that Kosovo fought this asymmetry by engaging the US. So the US would come in, and that asymmetry would be resolved. Unfortunately, I think the relation is not at that level for the US to play the kind of role that it used to. And now I think the US is too preoccupied with much bigger issues and that I think ultimately it's always up to DC, because nothing big and substantial has happened in the Western Balkans without the US.
Their direct involvement.
Direct and high-level involvement.
Yeah, because now they are supporting the EU dialogue, and that's where their role has been so far. But since you mentioned again the elections next year in the US, and that window of opportunity, which we don't know what may be looking next year, depending on the result of the election, do you believe that a breakthrough can happen, is likely in the relations between Kosovo and Serbia in the near future?
Yes. Likely, maybe no. I'm skeptical, especially after what happened last year, and especially having in mind that I do believe that in Serbia wants to postpone this as much as possible, this kind of status quo, and is probably doing everything possible for it to remain.
But why would the EU allow that to happen?
Well, I'm skeptical that the EU has any instruments towards a country that is not really clear whether it wants to join the EU or whether it has an actual open door. Even if it has an open door, now in Brussels, if you go, they talk about a new window of opportunity for enlargement. Even if it's there, like, will people in the region believe it's there? So I do think there's a huge credibility gap on the side of the EU. And I do think there's a clear interest in Serbia to postpone this. And I would also add, there is deep insecurity in Kosovo on how to proceed, having in mind this broader picture. So I am skeptical without a major Western push. So it would have to take, for the West to see a clear major security risk emerging, and that might happen, for them to take this to the level that it needs to be taken at a higher level. But for now, I don't see that kind of interest in the West to do that. They have, in a way, sort of parked this issue as a minor regional kind of topic. Yeah.
But do you see any increased security threat?
Well, we had a major crisis that was averted, an attack in the north that was averted. And some would be complacent and say, well, that kind of, it ended well for Kosovo. But I do think that the risks are still very high there, because you have a very vulnerable situation. In some cases, I've referred to it a bit of like a Northern Ireland situation, where you might have sporadic incidents that can easily spiral and escalate. You have a part of the territory in which the state is there and has exercised more authority, but it is not viewed as legitimate. So I think the north still remains a very vulnerable point. And within the next year or two, if there is no political solution at the big table, it can still bring back those kind of incidents. And we've seen that when they happen, they can spiral uncontrollably.
And when we mention security issues, Alban, I'm sure, gets scared in terms of economic perspective and investors. And I want to close with some more hope on the future and the economic perspective, talking about the potential. What are the opportunities that a regional market would represent for Kosovo, such as in connectivity, in energy transformation, or in other areas?
I think they serve a good purpose as long as they are not mixed up with the EU enlargement. They're not substitute for one another. They should be complemented. And unless there are clear signals that these can be a complement, essentially we cannot even reap the benefits of the cooperation, because that is what has been observed over the last decade or so. There is very little horizontal cooperation in terms of linkages of supply chains. One aspect that could improve is with now the idea of having greater access to European single markets, which could bring in more investment and essentially serve to the region for creating these horizontal linkages. And that would also facilitate inter-country trade and also improve the competitiveness.
Hold on just there. Is the region ready to compete with the EU market and potential?
Well,
I see we only see which is great, the EU single market to be participating there. But how about the region's potential to absorb the EU market?
Well, I think all Western countries, Western Balkan countries, and especially Kosovo, have to work on improving their competitiveness. And that is the weakest link in the whole economic aspects. You see the level of investments in research and innovation across the Western Balkan countries is very low, especially in Kosovo, which is lower than the regional average. Also the quality of education, which are key components for competitiveness, but also having public policies that support this kind of what we call supply-side economics. Most of economies in the region depend on external factors, or mostly consuming economies, whereas Kosovo in particular, sort of the growth is driven by consumption, partly or mainly financed by remittances, and you need a shift towards a more exporting economy. And for that to happen, you need several preconditions. Essentially, you need better fiscal policies, but also quality of education and skills of people. That would also serve as a way to keep people in, because there is this tendency of people leaving, and some of the people, in their view, have given it enough time for this to happen, and why bother, you know? Vienna is 1 hour flight away, so why wait our whole life? So I think in that regard, there are a lot of things that need to be changed at countries of Western Balkan countries, economies of Western Balkan countries, in order to be able to compete. But I think this opens this door of opportunity for creating horizontal linkages across the region, and then supporting this greater convergence with the EU. But as I said, regional cooperation in itself is insufficient to close this convergence gap with the EU. And that has been proved also with other transition economies, as with the example I quoted with Lithuania.
Agon, it's never easy for an author when you publish a paper to see the reactions and today's event. Would you have changed anything, or would you still change on the report something after today's discussion?
No, it has changed a lot during the last year, because we started writing last December, and so many things happened during the year that it had to be, so no. I think that's why there was the advantage of looking at it big picture, because the underlying, the major assumptions are still the same, no matter what happened, you know. In a way, they also confirmed, you know, the assumptions. What happened in the north proved that, you know, this is a vulnerable situation. It is a success story. There's a lot of good things happening, but those things are still vulnerable, you know. So we should not take them for granted. And I hope that, well, at least our hope was with this report to kind of.
Thank you, Alban. Thank you to everyone who has been watching us today. Thank you to all contributors, to the participants today. I highly appreciate your presence here, to organizers of this report. I am confident that only through our joint efforts we can help paving a way for a better and brighter future for Kosovo and the Western Balkans. And I'm positive that this report will serve as a valuable resource for the policymakers within Kosovo, and for seasoned observers either in the EU or across the Atlantic and broader in the region. Thank you very much. Faleminderit.
again for coming and being with us today. And we have a small reception outside. Please join us. And with that occasion, before we all leave, we also I like to recognize the whole great team that we have. Grady Wilson, Alp, Melih, Ecem. Please, just introduce yourself to our guests. I mean, they did a remarkable job pulling this together, and I'd like to again thank you to Limak Holding and Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for staying the whole time, and thank you, ambassadors and dear guests. Thank you very much.
is a champion of democracy in the region, with the fastest democratic rise in the last 3 years in rule of law, political rights and civil liberties, liberal and electoral democracy, transparency and anti-corruption. It also has the highest economic growth on average compared with the region. So task number 1 is to get the 5 EU non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo. And this is and must be a shared task among the transatlantic community because it is a shared responsibility. Of course, normalization of relations with Serbia matters. It matters because Serbia is our neighbor with whom we share over half of our border, and we cannot change geography and history. It also matters because Serbia has
Okay, I have to do it relaxed, okay? And I'd like to invite His Excellency Prime Minister Kurti for his speech.
Dear Deputy Prime Minister Emilia Recep, dear Ms. Arslan, Senior Director, Atlantic Council in Turkey, dear Ms. Özdemir, dear Mr. Volkan Koskir, an old friend with whom we've met first over 10 years ago, honorable ambassadors, dear members of parliament, colleagues from the government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to address you today. The Atlantic Council is a friendly organization of the Republic of Kosovo and a well-known platform to speak openly with each other about the political and economic challenges we face as an Atlantic community in a changing world. Congratulations also on the report, although I don't fully share some of the assumptions made. Not to dwell on history, but I think those who know this region know well that Kosovo's freedom and independence are not a gift. It was won after centuries of occupation and different empires and regimes. It was won with the sacrifice and the blood of our people through generations. Most recently, besides our people's liberation struggle, led by the United States, it was won also with the intervention of the most powerful alliance in human history, NATO. Just as it is imperative to recall the event, it is also imperative to understand the reason behind such an intervention, which was to stop the genocidal campaign of a dictator. Although the most recent, this wasn't the first time that the United States led a coalition against dictatorship in Europe. In the Second World War, the United States helped liberate France and the rest of Europe from the Nazi regime. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, not unilaterally, but in concert and coordination with the international community. After the genocidal campaign that led to NATO intervention, after years of UN administration, after years of negotiations in Vienna, led by the UN Special Envoy Marty Ahtisaari, who later won Nobel Peace Prize, and concluded in the report sent to the Security Council for approval that the only viable option for Kosovo is independence, supervised independence which lasted for 4 years. So it is very interesting to recall now that almost 25 years ago, in spring 1999, 19 countries got together to bomb a European country. It must have been very bad. As we know today, 19 countries sometimes cannot issue a press release together. But back then, they bombed Milosevic Yugoslavia. On 15th of January, we are going to commemorate 25 years of a horrible Rečak massacre, which was a clear indication that in Kosovo we have Srebrenica underneath. On the other hand, in September 2012, 25 countries together, comprising international steering group, jointly concluded that supervision of Kosovo's independence should be terminated. We have 19 countries together, all Western democratic, saying that Milosevic Yugoslavia should be bombed, and we have 25 countries together in September 2012 saying that Kosovo is fine, it should be fully independent, and supervision shall be terminated. To use Kosovo as a precedent to justify intervention elsewhere, like Kremlin is doing, is nothing but a direct attack on truth, humanity, and sanity. It also shows a complete disregard for international law and the responsibility to protect, as an international norm seeking to ensure that the international community never again fails to halt the mass atrocity crimes of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. This was a concept that emerged and was enforced after NATO intervention in Kosovo and was adopted unanimously in 2005 at the UN World Summit, the largest gathering of heads of states and government in history. It also shows disregard for the International Court of Justice, which by 10 votes to 4 gave the opinion that the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo, adopted on 17th of February 2008, did not violate international law. Our planet does not have a higher court than ICJ. Therefore, the legal debate on Declaration of Independence of Kosovo has been concluded on 22nd of July 2010. I believe that now, when far-right movements and autocrats are on the rise, the Atlantic community and democracies must be even more active. This, first and foremost, would relate to joining of the 5 EU non-recognizers, to the rest, 22 members of European Union who do recognize independence of Kosovo, by pushing dictators and extremists who air false narratives and draw false comparisons to justify their hegemony projects. So it is not only we who would be helped, it is the transatlantic bridge and the democracies in the world today who would make a leap forward in combating this right-wing extremism and autocratic tide anti-corruption. It also has the highest economic growth on average compared with the region. So task number 1 is to get the 5 EU non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo, and this is and must be a shared task among the transatlantic community because it is a shared responsibility. Of course, normalization of relations with Serbia matters. It matters because Serbia is our neighbor with whom we share over half of our border, and we cannot change geography and history. It also matters because Serbia has initiated all wars in former Yugoslavia, where it neither took responsibility nor apologized for all the human suffering, crime, and destruction they caused. On the contrary. Today, it keeps 48 military forward operating bases, like a horseshoe around Kosovo. And this horseshoe in 1999 was inside Kosovo, now is around it. In the first 2 years of our government, Serbia brought its military 4 times to the border, flying Russian MiG-29 planes, fighter jets, Russian Mi-35 choppers, and it brought Russian T-72 MS tanks. Serbia, unfortunately, has not changed, nor has it democratized. Instead of showing remorse for the crimes it committed in the past, it keeps threatening new wars. This is why normalization matters. Normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia means normalization of Serbia in a democratic and European sense of the word. And all this not only because Kosovo's membership in international organizations must not be objected to, but because Kosovo and Serbia must be able to live side by side as normal neighbors with good neighborly European relations. This is why I welcomed President Biden's letter in 2021 that put mutual recognition at the center of a future normalization agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. Because mutual